with ma'am's presentation and we can have a discussion round following it. So over to Sunil sir.
Thank you, Rajalakshmi. So we know that we are running behind COVID, and our strategy is testing, finding out positive patients, isolation, and while doing this, we may be missing many of the psychological and social factors of patient and family. So we will hear it from Dr. Chitra, who is currently working as professor and head of Department of Psychiatry, as well as a senior consultant in palliative medicine and psycho-oncology in Believers Church Medical College Hospital. She is very closely associated with palliative care for more than 20 years, and she has been instrumental in starting many um, mental health programs in palliative care institution, and she also runs an NGO called Mehak, which runs mental health programs in the community. Welcome, madam, and it's over to you.
Thank you, Sunil. Rajalakshmi, can I have the Good afternoon to all of you. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are.
Okay. So, though I was asked to speak on psychosocial interventions, I thought it was important that we just spoke about what the distress is about before saying what we can do about it. And as this is all based on the ebook that has been developed also. So in the chat section, you can see the download link given. I'll be very grateful if all of you could have the ebook also opens, because there is an algorithm and there are a few pages that you can flip through when I'm going through the talk. But before we go to that section, I just wanted to give you a background, because usually when we speak of psychosocial issues, we just speak of the usual anxiety, depression, very familiar terms, and we must have gone through several sessions of how to deal with that. So here today, I'm just trying to focus more on how we make sense of the distress, psychological distress or psychosocial distress in the context of COVID-19. So we all know that since the first case of the coronavirus, which was diagnosed actually in December 2019, it has just swept across the world, and it has galvanized global action also. And this has brought in several new and unusual and almost very strange patterns in our life, like social distancing, lockdown. So we are actually, we have new behavioral patterns. We have to look into our day-to-day functioning in a very different way. And while these steps are all very critical to mitigate the spread of the disease, these are expected, and the evidence says that these will have consequences on the mental health and well-being of people in both short-term and long-term time period. And these are these are of sufficient importance also. So we should be aware that there will be mental health issues. I'm sure that all of you are noticing evidence coming up, as well as you see reports coming in the media, people calling up, mental health professionals to talk about, the behavior difficulties, people calling to find out how parents should manage children who are locked down, because children are held inside their home without going out to play. Children are exposed to teaching online now. So now online teaching has become the trend in the last few weeks. And it is actually sometimes disrupting also, because there might be only one laptop in one household, and the father and the child has to share it. So it's everything. There's a clear difference in the lifestyle that we are looking into. And so we as healthcare professionals have to look into what efforts should be done on prevention and also intervention, which would address this mental health issues or psychological distress. Next slide, please. So this is I'm just giving this figure of a person. This could be anyone. This could be a mother. This could be a daughter. This could be a healthcare worker. Somebody who's thinking, see, a healthcare worker, including me, when you are inside and not able to do your routine work in the community, take care of people, you are bound to take care with your medical ethics. You are not able to perform to the level that you're used to or the routine that you're used to. And Sometimes you're really plagued by thoughts like, am I not doing enough? Am I not doing enough by going out to help others? The guilt or the blame, am I not, even when we look at frontline health workers, sometimes we feel that we are not able to really, you know, stay hand in hand with them and offer care to people. It could be a woman thinking that is my daughter who's away, who's in another university in another part of India or outside India. Is she taking care of herself? How will she manage her food? Is she sleeping well? I'm so worried. And also I could think of my own old mother, my poor mom, she's all alone. How is she managing? Is she so vulnerable? She's also got a cardiac morbidity. How will she face, if she develops fever, it will just unsettle everything. Why is this happening to me? What is this heaviness in my heart? Everybody wants vacations, and now we have a vacation. We are bound at home, but nobody seems to be happy. People feel that it is imposed on them. They want to go out. So what is this heaviness in spite of this no work? We are supposed to have a free time, relax, but we are not. What is this happening? Why isn't this getting sorted out? So much of uncertainty in terms of the situation. Next slide, please. Uncertainty in terms of even the prognosis. As healthcare workers, we are all updating ourselves with COVID. What is the prognosis like? So there's a looming shortage, severe shortage of resources. So these have alarming implications for individual, for every person, and the collective health. The emotional, spiritual, and social functioning of people. And I've been reading that they are even anticipating a mental health pandemic as a consequence. That is an epidemic of mental health issues. Actually, there is evidence following large-scale disasters, whether traumatic like the World Trade Center attacks or natural ones like hurricanes. It is almost always accompanied by increases in depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, very importantly, substance use disorder, which is actually always common behavioral or psychiatric disorder in our settings. So, and then it's also associated things like domestic violence, child abuse, etc. So, in the context of COVID also, it appears that there will be a substantial increase in all these things. So let us just go through it once and also see what, as healthcare workers, we can do as the initial step and how we can empower others. Next slide, please. So how one make sense of the stresses? We are actually witnessing so many expressions of collective loss. People dying. When you look into your social media and see people dying, or doctors and nurses giving up their lives in different parts of the country, you feel so much with them. It's for the first time we are bound together. The whole world is bound together with one single factor. There is a loss of meaning. There is grief. All of us are grieving together for some loss of people or things that we don't know. We blaming, there's a lot of blame which comes along with us, and very, very, very strong fear and anxiety of what is going to happen. Families are separated. In our country, we are reading about the poverty, the migrants, the long queues for food, the homelessness, the bewildered and lost people amidst complete dread of a catastrophe, which we are just awaiting. We don't know. We think Kerala is safe. We think many parts of India are safe. We are talking about flattened curves. We have gone over the peak, but we don't know. We are still uncertain. And of course, in palliative care, we are losing contact. We are not able to touch our patients. We are not able to offer the presence, which we always do. We always claim palliative care is there with people throughout the journey. We are not able to do that to the most vulnerable. And we are also very anticipating a rapid progression of the acute disease and increase in number of deaths in ICUs, and there's a potential increase in bereavement, morbidity, and also burnout in healthcare workers. Next slide, please. So there is some study which has gone with the COVID-19. So I just got a few evidence, and most of this is from China and Italy. So let us take China for instance. There was a survey with tools to look into the psychological impact, and on 53.8% of the respondents, the psychological impact ranged from moderate to severe, with 28.8% having severe anxiety symptoms, 16.5% reporting moderate to severe depression, and 8.1% reporting high levels of distress. And in Italy, there's a study which shows that there's a high level anxiety in 73.9% of those surveyed, and the numbers surveyed were around a good number, 3,452. So this is, I have given the references. If people want to, they can just check out. There's a lot of studies which is going in mental health issues also. Next slide, please. And also the current evidence points out that the risk of the psychological morbidity, we are talking about other mortality is higher among the elderly and vulnerable, but the risk of psychological morbidity is also higher among the elderly, the vulnerable, and the gender is a factor. Women are more vulnerable to the anxiety and depression. But the other side of it is these evidence also show that the integrated psychological intervention on all levels, whether it is preventive, whether it is management of the issues, or it's on follow-up also, it shows to reduce the risk of mental health morbidity and promote social stability. So there is a need for integrated interventions. So that is exactly why when we developed the ebook guidelines, we have a good contribution of the psychosocial algorithms and touching up of issues which are very important in this context. Next slide, please. So what could be the common psychological issues that we could see in such a pandemic? One is what we see in every kind of situation, that is broadly or very commonly said as emotional distress. I'll come to it later. And another expression is people coming up only with unhealthy behaviors. That means that they become very, they suddenly start using substance use, or some unhealthy behaviors. They do not cooperate with people, they become hostile, and some of them have just showing non-compliance with public health directives. This is a behavioral expression again. So the emotional distress or the psychological distress can be expressed in different matters. And when you look into the diagram, you can see that the majority of people are actually very resilient. We have inbuilt reserve of resilience, but then there is a distress component which is overlapping. There is a human behavior component which is overlapping, and then of course there is a mental illness component which is seen, which can come as as a consequence of the pandemic, or it can be that in a person with mental illness, this can be expressed in a much more exaggerated fashion. Next slide, please. So who's at risk with with the psychological distress? People who are quarantined or isolated, people who contract the disease and are being managed, vulnerable populations, like I said, the elderly, the people who are, who do not have the benefits of the majority, like the migrant population or the refugees, or, the people who are homeless. So vulnerable population. People who are vulnerable because of comorbidities, who have other chronic diseases, like like any other lifestyle diseases, and like the diseases that we take care of in palliative care, like cancer and HIV, etc. Those who encounter loss, family members or even staff who seek losses of people or things or property, whatever you're losing. We are also encountering loss in terms of our own roles. There is a sudden shifting of roles. We have lost the role of routine schedule, work. We have lost a lot of things which most of us cope with, but there are people who cannot cope with even such minor losses. And when we talk of major losses, that's death of people. So it need not be dying due to COVID alone. If there is a death in this time, there are people who cannot go to the funeral of their own father, or who cannot attend, who cannot be part of a gathering, and who cannot visit their parents, and when the parents die suddenly. So these people are very at a risk to develop some psychological distress. And of course, health workers and carers, who are especially the ones who are at the front line. Next slide, please. So emotional distress can be seen as, can be understood as different matters. As we all know that emotional distress is not something like pain or any other physical symptom which can be measured, but it's more a behavior, isn't it? So it's usually understood by people who are assessing as emotions. Like it is expressed as emotions, like a person can be angry, very angry, can be guilty, can be blaming and become hostile, can be constantly worrying and have anxiety and panic, and can be hopeless, can be sad and hopeless. but it can also be understood as categories which helps us define them. And also when you define them as categories, it helps us to develop interventions to manage them, especially when they become psychiatric categories like anxiety and depressive disorders. They are actually psychiatric disorders like panic disorder. This helps them. We have universal guidelines how to diagnose them, how to manage them. You have also concepts which have been defined like grief, burnout, and also existential issues or spiritual issues. Next slide, please. So when you look at this slide, I hope, is it clear? I hope you can see this. If you can look at this, you can see that this is like a range of issues that come for an individual who kind of, it's like a journey from being healthy to ill. So in a healthy person also, we have normal mood fluctuations, but we can be calm and we can take things in a stride. But when you react to it, you become irritable, you become impatient, you can become nervous, you can become sad or overwhelmed. When you become injured, it becomes anger, anxiety, the sadness becomes pervasive. That means it lasts for more than a few minutes or few hours. It can last for more days or sometimes even weeks, and you become hopeless. And when you become really ill, then it becomes excessive. There is excessive anxiety, panic attacks, violence, aggression, and then of course suicidal thoughts and depression. You can see that the journey of a person can have good sense of humor, can be performing well in, but it can, when you're reacting, it goes into, display sarcasm, then negative attitude, poor performance, poor concentration, and then becomes, when you become ill, it's that you cannot perform your duties, you cannot control your behavior or concentrate. Normal sleep patterns with very few sleep difficulties. Then when you're reacting, you have trouble sleeping, you have intrusive thoughts, it goes to disturbed sleep, recurrent images and nightmares. And then when you're ill, it becomes, you cannot fall asleep, sleeping too much or too little. You can be physically well with good energy level when you're healthy. Then you have headaches, low energy, pains, aches and pains due to muscle tension. This increases and fatigue increases, and then you really feel that you have a physical illness and constant fatigue. You are healthy. When you're healthy, you're physically and socially active. So when you're reacting, your activity decreases, your socializing decreases. And then when you're injured, avoidance and withdrawal. And then you don't go out at all, you just withdraw, there is social withdrawal. When you're healthy, you try to not use alcohol as a habit, sometimes socially limited alcohol use, and any other unhealthy behaviors, like I said, like gambling or something. When you're reacting, your control over it comes a little less and you start using it regularly. Injured, it increases and it becomes hard to control, and then you become dependent on it, and then the craving continues. This is like, I'm just putting in like a behavioral pattern where any normal person can go through this journey and can end up having a illness. Next slide, please. So what are the common, again, to see it in a different way, what are the common manifestations of psychological distress when you're assessing a person? Next slide. Can you, yeah, okay. So by feeling emotional, like just I said in the previous slide, it can be feeling stressed or overwhelmed, feeling anxious or worried, thoughts of one's own health and that of loved ones, sadness, low mood, frustration, irritability, getting impatient and angry, difficulty in concentrating on one task, loss of interest in activities, and trouble relaxing. Next one. Physically, increased heart rate because of the anxiety, restlessness, or agitation, stomach upset, multiple aches and pains not associated with fever, but all these symptoms can give the fear that you are getting an infection and the fear of contracting COVID, especially if you have been exposed. Next one, please. Behavioral, like I said before, fatigue, vague, uncomfortable sensations, changes in eating patterns, difficulty sleeping, and aggression. Next one, please. So there can be worsening of the pre-existing symptoms, like already if they have mental health problems, there can be worsening of the mental health problems, worsening of chronic health problems in a vulnerable population, and increased use of alcohol, tobacco, or other substances. Next one, please. So when you are assessing, please keep in mind the red flag signs of something which you are not able to control. Agitation can be due to, agitation has already been dealt with. It can be either due to anxiety, or if you're disoriented, it can be due to delirium. So agitation and disorientation and confusion comes under a broad thing of due to anxiety, panic, and fear, or due to delirium. Then you have substance use. Substance use disorders can be if a person has been using alcohol or any other substance continuously before lockdown, sudden withdrawal symptoms can start. Hallucinations, because you're alone, you're locked down, people can get minor psychotic symptoms and delusions, or existing mental illness can get exacerbated. And the red flag, the main thing we have to look into is suicidal ideation. I think there was a report that already in Kerala we had 1 or 2 suicides with related to quarantine and isolation. Next slide, please. So then how do we start talking to these people? Dr. Biju had taken a very good session on communication, so I'm not going into the details of it. Please look into the ebook page 10 where you have communication tips, and you can go through it again. And if you practice your questions that you need to ask, it will really help you. Next slide, please. But I just want to focus on what do you really focus, the areas that you could focus on when you start asking questions. So broadly, you can actually divide this into 4 sections, and you can start asking about COVID-19. I'm talking only about the stress related questions. I'm not talking about general history taking. So if when you're talking about COVID-19 related stressors, you can ask, about whether there has been exposure to the illness, or whether there has been any infected family member, whether there's any loss of loved ones, whether there's any kind of plaguing thoughts about social distancing. So anything related to COVID-19. When I'm talking about secondary adversities, it's something coming secondary to the COVID-19. So it's most essentially in our country, it would be economic, the financial losses, the lack of resources, the lack of food, shelter, not able to access the facilities like they used to. What that would be the secondary adversities that we would face. The third is the psychological effects that I said about anxiety, panic, depression, sleep issues, psychosomatic preoccupation, substance use. And of course, we should always look into indicators of individual vulnerability. That is, it could be physical vulnerability where people could have comorbidities of illnesses, which itself can see if somebody has an illness, they would know by the social media and all the information that the load that they're getting, that, okay, I'm at a risk to get this infection. So even a mild kind of body ache or fever would kind of, increase the panic. So even that, individual vulnerability of comorbidities, and also mental illness. People already who have mental illness are prone to have more psychological distress, either because of lack of compliance, lack of availability of medication, or even because of the fear which can compound the behavior and expression of the illness. Next slide, please. So just going through, I'm sure Dr. Biju mentioned all this, but keep in mind the challenges due to COVID is that establishing rapport will be difficult, non-verbal means of communication is impeded, communications is restricted to the phone or the social media, and there's heightened emotions. Breaking bad news is going to be tough. Heightened emotions on both sides, from our side and their side. Remember, like in yesterday's session, the intensivist was saying that they are all familiar with many things, but when the acute setting, when somebody comes, they seem to forget what to do. The schedule, the routine is lost, and they're all worried about how to manage COVID. So those kind of heightened emotions can happen on both sides of the table, of the phone, maybe in this respect. Next slide, please. The nurse protocol, which Moira had mentioned yesterday, remember them, like name or mirror the emotions, like saying that you seem very angry. Understand the emotions, say that I can imagine how stressful this is. You can start your conversation when they're talking about their stress by this empathetic statement. Respect them. I respect your feelings, but we cannot do. They might be asking for something which you feel is demanding. So always respect them when you are saying that we cannot do it or we can do it. Support the patient or the family member by using words like, is there someone else you can talk to about this? Or can I speak to someone to support you? And explore the emotion further by asking, tell me about your concerns. I need to know more about it to help you. So this is very important to keep this in mind. Next slide, please. I'm just picking on a few issues which are really becoming issues. Especially we are seeing this in our settings here. Stigma is becoming very common. We are hearing even, globally, how people even name the virus as the Chinese virus, how people who are Chinese are being stigmatized, and this can affect people who in our country also. We are seeing people getting labeled, stereotyped, discriminated and treated separately. Wards are being, divided by faith. So there are many things which are happening due to stigma and because they experience the loss of status due to COVID or due to several other reasons. So this is something as healthcare workers, we should keep in mind that we should not at any point, in fact, we should address it in a very appropriate way by not using discriminatory terms, like not saying infected person or a suspected case, but saying that person who has contracted the disease, and not kind of fall into the fake messages and the media thing which actually adds to the stigma. So we have to really use authentic information from agencies which are very credible to give news and use their language. So we have to be very careful when we use language when we give information to people. Next slide, please. Like I said before, substance use is becoming a big problem. So this can be like, in individuals already with a substance use disorder. As I'm speaking from Kerala. Kerala is the state which consumes alcohol the most in India. And we, at any point of celebration or any point of time, we consume alcohol to a great extent. And we have gone through two major festivals like Vishu and Easter where there was no access to alcohol. So these people are more likely to experience a lot of loneliness, sometimes homelessness and incarceration. They might not be able to access and they might have withdrawal symptoms. And those who are isolated actually could, some people who are not actually with substance use disorder, because of their anxiety and indulgent substance use, they can self-medicate with drugs they have, even analgesics or anti-anxiety or sleep medications. This is something we have to keep in mind, where people who are alone and have the fear can overuse the medications that they already have with them. Next slide, please. Domestic violence. This is again coming up very much in in the helpline, and also you have a lot of support coming up from the government and other NGOs. Confined families leads to conflict in people, especially in partners or or the spouses who already have issues, and this could be compounded by substance use, because if there one person has substance use disorder and there's a lack of availability of alcohol, for instance, and then his anger is directed towards his spouse or his partner, and it can lead to violence. Loss of income. Okay, there's financial strain. People are not able to get access to proper resources. Children are hungry. There is loss of role also. The domineering person in the family, the breadwinner, not able to really do what he can. So there's a loss of control also. So these can lead to conflict. There's a fear of infection and anxiety, and that itself can cause a panic and kind of, issues of arguments between the family members. And there's also the sense of, there's no sense of respite. When it's to end, the lockdown is continuing. I'm not able to go out or do my job or get things that I really want to do. And of course, there's the lack of social support, and especially the faith support, people going to temples or, going to churches. There is going to social welfare organizations, all that kind of, going for a routine to Kudumbashri. Many kind of community participatory activities are limited now. And all this can affect your kind of interactions in your small house, and can lead to conflicts within people. And this can lead to domestic violence. And of course, I'm not mentioning about mental health issues already in a family, or, and the lack of medication. All those factors will also cause domestic violence. Next slide, please. This is very important because sleep issues is something which affects everybody, including all of us, because of the difference in the lifestyle that we are following now. And we wake up late and sleep late, or, everything, and it affects our daytime functioning. When you have your food, everything is postponed and becomes, totally opposite to what we were doing when we had a routine life. So when there are sleep issues, that can have poor daytime functioning, including fatigue, poor concentration, impaired performance, malaise, which can again, if you have malaise, have the fear that you are developing some fever, behavioral problems, irritability, impatience, chronic pain. It's all these things are, and so we need to look into interventions which will address all these also. Next slide, please. I'm going to touch on spiritual distress also, because this has not been touched. Grief and bereavement has been taken on the first day, and burnout is going to be touched tomorrow. But I will talk about spiritual distress, because psychosocial distress, and these are all distress which overlaps one another, but spiritual distress as such has a separate kind of meaning, which actually brings so much of meaning into our lives. It's very subjective. It is very unique. It's a very complex kind of concept, but very personal also. For the caregivers, it's about clarity, the role they have, the hope they would have, what is going to happen to them or the loved ones. For the patient, if suppose, even if it's mild infection, the affirmation, the fear that something is going to happen to him would make him think of forgiveness, reconciliation, meaning, relationship with God, fatalism, about, did I do something wrong? All those questions. In the society, again, like about taboo, having the infection, societal beliefs will influence a lot. You are losing, with the lockdown, you're losing the opportunity to share your compassion and your values with others. The community support has become limited. And for professionals, again, there is a lack of clarity. We are unable to prioritize. We have poor skills for some aspects. We don't know what to do as a frontline health worker, but we have our own set of beliefs also, which influence how we respond or react to the situation. So this all actually can cause spiritual distress. It could be hopelessness. It could be questions like, why now? Why is this happening? What am I to do? There is so many which can kind of plague your thoughts. Next slide, please. And of course, in the follow-up, it has been always said that when there is a disaster, humanitarian disaster, one of the commonest issue that follows up is post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm not even putting it as a disorder, but I'm saying even it as post-traumatic stress as as a emotion that we carry, because when I look at it, many health workers will be forced to encounter situations where they'll have to tell grieving relatives, we did our best with the staff and resources available, but it wasn't enough. So we have a feeling that how are we going to manage? Dr. Divakaran really brought this out yesterday, where we feel that because of the resources are not enough, or because we are not well equipped, we might not have the capacity to care as much as we want. And rather than saying that we did all we could do, say that we couldn't do enough. And this is the seed of a moral injury. And it could be traumatic and lead to PTSD or post-traumatic stress in many, if not all, of our health workers. So to be aware of this too. Next slide, please. So I want you all to look, if you can open the ebook, that's also good that you look into this, because this is the algorithm we have developed in the ebook for psychosocial interventions. It's very simple, and it really gives you a clear idea of what to do. So it's about, again, from your communication, call, introduce yourself, check where they are, reflective listening, open-ended questions, empathizing statements, summarizing what you have heard to say that you have listened to them. And if you look into your ebook, there is a psychosocial supporting document which actually gives you explanations of how reflective listening should be done, what are open-ended questions. And then when you elicit the symptoms, you look into symptoms which I mentioned before, which would qualify either as anxiety or sleep disturbance, and look into the red flag signs, like I said. So we have done this algorithm using a scale which you can see beneath, called the distress thermometer, where 0 is no distress and 10 is extreme distress. So if you can you can measure the distress, then it will be very good. You can ask people to mark where they are. It's very easy for them to say. And if the perceived distress is a score less than 4, they can actually cope with suggestions. You can help them by reassuring them and with suggestions like